he was going to tell us a little bit about the atmospheric railway and actually demonstrate, I believe, to us how it actually works. He's used his own working model for us to see. John.
Please, don't clap, just throw money. This is predicated upon a number of ideas. I'm going to assume that you know absolutely nothing whatsoever about atmospheric railways. And I'm just going to try and explain it from there. And it's really a very simple idea, so much so that I'm confident that when you leave here, you're going to know precisely how this atmospheric railway works. I must say, and I never give an apology before I speak, but this is work in progress. I am preparing a more formal talk on it, which I hope to be able to present to you at some time not too far distant future. However, to begin with, atmospheric railway, let's just think about this idea with me. You all know that if you were at the bottom of a very, very deep ocean, you would have to wear protective clothing because water has mass, it has weight, and the water would be pressing down upon you. But not only does water, the weight of all that, say 1,000 feet of water pressed down upon you, it also squeezes in with just as much pressure on the front of you and on the back of you, all over you. You would be crushed by this sea of water. Well, the idea of the atmospheric railway is using this idea, but on the surface. Because here we all are sitting in Stanley Halls, and we think there's nothing around us, but we live at the bottom of a sea of air. This air goes up 20, 30,000 feet or more, and it becomes rarer as it goes up. It isn't nothing. Remember, it's 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, 0.03% carbon dioxide, so it's got these gases in it, and these gases weigh something, and we live at the bottom of this sea of air, and that is very important to us. It's pressing down on us, and it's pressing on our back and on our front. Now for the zero budget production bit. I have got here a piece of cardboard tube, no expense spared. And on this piece of cardboard tube, I've cut a slot. There's no magic to it, there is a slot. And over that, I have sellotaped a piece of paper. It gets better. This is a teaspoon, which I was told, you're not going out with a spoon like that, I'm going to have to. And it's used, I mean, it was a bit better than teaspoons on wooden trains and elastic bands. The atmospheric railway was a bit more technical than that, but we'll get the idea, okay? So I've attached this teaspoon to this train just to show you what went on. And this tube was actually made of cast iron. It was 10 feet long, and it had a flange at the end so you could put lots of them together, and the diameter was 15 inches. Okay, now the way it worked, the train had a shoe. This was called the shoe, and the shoe of the train was in the tube, and the train was on the rails because the tube was in between the rails. Now, just imagine for a minute what I said about us having the air pressing down upon us. Let's just imagine that the bowl of my spoon is circular. It's like a 2p coin. Now, I've got an engine down there which can evacuate all of the air from this side in front of the train. It can take all of the air out. It sucks it out, so we have no air in there. If we have no air in there, there is nothing in there. It is a vacuum. Don't think there's nothing in there at all. Which means that the air behind the shoe is pressing onto it and will simply push the train along. It is as simple as that. That is how it worked. The difficulty was keeping this seal. I nearly crashed my train then, but it's keeping the seal down. This seal here at the top of the groove was made of leather, of ox leather. It had to be kept supple, and so tallow was put on it. And some of you, I've already have heard stories that what happened was the rats ate the tallow. It's not quite as simple as that. The tallow, the leather did have problems with frost, yes, but it wasn't necessarily the rats that ate it. Now, of course, you're going to say to me, well, if you've got this piece of ox leather going over this slit, why isn't the atmosphere pressing down on that and pushing it into the slot and into the tube? Well, it would have done, but these were Victorian inventors. They knew how to overcome that. What did they do? Over the top of this, they put 6-inch steel plates, so that the weight of the atmosphere above was pressing down on these 6-inch steel plates. And this set, it lifted as it went along, and it sealed as it went behind. What I couldn't put on here, there's a small wheel behind, pressing it back into place. Okay? So it is as simple as that. That was the principle behind the atmospheric railway, of which there were only 4 working railways in the world, and the second one was here in South Norwood. And as Tom said, going from New Cross to West Croydon. And you can see one of these pipes in the Museum of Croydon. And if you try to take a photograph of it, you will be told off, because someone thinks that you might be pinching the invention. But let's face it, it was a fabulous idea. And of course you begin to realise, friends, that we've got a vehicle that doesn't have to carry its own fuel. Because the fuel was in the state, 10 tonnes of coal a day these engine houses got through. There were 3 engine houses, one at New Cross, one at Norwood Junction, although it was called the Jolly Sailor at first. The name was changed on the 3rd of June 1845 to Norwood. We had one here, and we had another one at West Croydon. Amazingly, you can see a picture of the South Norwood one if you look up atmospheric railways on the internet. And it looks like a church, because the design brief was, you've got to make it look like a Gothic building. And they did. And it worked. The engine was made by Bolton and Watt. That is the James Watt's company. Yeah? He who watched the kettle by the fire, just as I'd been sitting eating my toast this morning thinking, how am I going to design this? So did Watt, and that was the cheaper. It was £4,500 the engine. Okay? Now that engine still exists. It's in the water pumping station at Surrey Street. And the outside of that pumping station is the Croydon, or the bulk of it is the Croydon pumping station. The New Cross pumping station was never used. And sadly, it was from New Cross to West Croydon. It was going to go on to Epsom, and in fact the Epsom bit was constructed, but it was never used. It was constructed whilst this was actually in a state of collapse. And it was intended for it to go on to Portsmouth, just like the canal was earlier. The canal was originally meant to go to Portsmouth because of the trouble we had with the French. Okay? The other difficulty was London Bridge, because from London Bridge to New Cross there's a 1 in 75 incline, and these trains had a bit of difficulty going up inclines. The other thing, the final statistic I will give you, because I can tell you want to get to more wine and wine drinks and so on. I'm not listening to me. Interestingly, we've got the South Devon and Exeter, which ran from Exeter to Plymouth. We've got the London Croydon, and we've got the Kingstown to Dalkey in Ireland, and Saint-Germain in Paris. They were the principal 4 railways that worked. The Paris one was built actually after ours had finished. This is in 1843, when we just had locomotives, From the 1st to the 14th of May, some 8,600 passengers were carried. And the first class fare was 2 and 3 pence, and the second class was 1 and 9 pence, and there wasn't the third class. In 1846, when our atmospheric railway was at its peak, we'd got 42,365 passengers in that fortnight. In that fortnight. So what I'm trying to tell you is the massive increase in the commuter traffic was such that they required bigger pipes to run it. But you simply couldn't just say, oh well, we'll dig the old pipes up and lay new ones. It was so expensive to make and lay these pipes. Part of the reason why it went bust. And just to give you some idea, purely for the interest of it, it must have been devilishly slow, but you would be wrong. Because the average speed of these trains was 34 miles an hour. And they had no trouble reaching 60 miles an hour. And in fact, they had to reach 60 miles an hour to get over the wood incline, to go over the railway that was planned for the new East Croydon. They had to have a run at it. And that's what they did. So these trains could go 60 plus miles an hour. That's not bad, is it? And there were 10 up trains a day and 9 down trains. And as I say, this is a work in progress. You're actually seeing the very notes of my research. Signed copies of these will be. So that's it. That's how they. Any questions? Anything about the running of the atmospheric railway?
Yeah, if it was 10 up and 9 down, what happened to the other ones? Did they all get lost?
No, it's just from the records that I've got. I'm not quite sure what they started. Work in progress. Well, you could run it. No, the point was that it was only single track. So you'd use the same track to go up and down. So it was going up and coming down, and you'd stop at either end. It was just that number. It was just single. It wasn't. It was only one line that would go up and then come back down again. I merely took that statistic from the trials that were done. I haven't got them all here. The running times on the 25th of July 1846, they measured the running times of the trains going up and coming down, and we say we've got that number going up and just one that's coming down. But is anyone unsure about the physics of how this thing worked? Remember, the mistake that people make is that the train was pulled along. Well, you can't have nothing pulling a train on, can you? It was a vacuum. It was the weight of the air that pushed it along. As demonstrated in this no expense spared model that I produced for this morning. Thank you. Sorry.
Did the later trains, like at Saint-Germain, work any better?
To the best of my knowledge at the moment, no. They didn't last long. All of them had technical difficulties, and it was the valve, the seal, maintaining the vacuum, because what happened, it was one of our faults, is that if the seal wasn't complete, well, if it wasn't airtight, if the vacuum leaked, they had to send down a locomotive to pick up the passengers to take them on.